Hi, guys. Welcome to You Are Here. I'm your host, Danny. This is a podcast all about growing up and figuring it out together. And today we have a very, very special episode. I do just want to give a content sensitivity warning, trigger warning for anybody listening. We are going to be talking about heavy topics such as we'll put them on the screen. And I just want to be very sensitive if you have children with you or if these are topics that can bring up things in yourself or feelings in yourself that may be like too big to just listen to. It's going to be an incredible podcast. We have a very, very close family friend of ours sharing her story today, and I think it'll bless you, and I think it'll just really open your eyes to a different perspective on a very common and nuanced and misunderstood topic, especially within the church. So thank you guys so much for listening, and can't wait to chat. Hey guys, I'm Danny. Welcome back to You Are Here. This is a podcast all about growing up and figuring it out together. And today we have a very special guest. She's never been on the podcast before, but she's very special to me and my family. And this is Monica.
Hi.
Hey. She's awesome. Her story is incredible, and it does relate to the topic of abortion and going through that process. So just warning anyone, if you're in the car, triggered, sensitive topic, just be mindful of that. So I'm so excited to talk to you about this.
Thank you for having me.
You're awesome. Fun fact as well, you are the grandmother of our dogs.
Oh,
we got
yes.
our dogs
I'm
from
like, wait,
you.
I'm a grandma? I thought you were going to announce that I was going to be your grandma. I'm like, wait, what? This would have been a cool way to do it.
Okay, yeah.
No, yes,
our dogs-
absolutely.
Yep.
We're related through our dogs.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know what you are to them.
I'm a grandma.
Yeah, they're grandma. They're grandma. Yeah, for sure. So that was awesome. But okay, so
Has that been your best Christmas gift ever?
Yes, honestly. We love our dogs. I love my Holiday and Mochi. They're very cute. They're crazy.
Shout out.
They're crazy though.
Yes.
Her dogs are crazy too.
Yeah, their mama's crazy.
Yeah, fair enough. I can tell. I'm so glad that you came and that you're talking about your story and came on my podcast.
Oh, thank you for creating the space.
Yeah, absolutely. So something I love about you and just who you are, like you are so passionate about like the things that you care about and the things that like matter to you. And you're also so thoughtful and so mindful of being honoring to like everyone involved in your story. Like I respect that so much about you, that everybody, like you're so aware that like your life didn't just involve you, you know? And I think you hear people talk about things that happened to them and they just kind of are like letting it all out there. And while they're, at the cost of other people, do you know what I mean? And so obviously this topic is very sensitive. It does involve so many people. So, but I do want to talk about your life and your story. So I would love to hear, since the topic is about abortion, like what was the conversation around abortion when you were growing up, or like with your family, your church, whatever that was?
There was no conversation.
Awesome.
Just like there was no conversation on sex education,
Okay.
birth control, or any of that kind of thing. So I grew up in a conservative Hispanic home, in a legalistic upbringing in their church. Yeah. So you could just imagine how those conversations would go. It was more of I grew up in the purity culture. I don't know if you guys, I know you guys are way younger than me, but I don't know how much you guys were able to be a part of that. But I did grow up in the purity culture. So there was really no talk about sex education or even abortion. So the thought of abortion, it was more of it's murder, which, and or don't do it. You're going to hell if you do it. And, it's an unforgivable sin and that kind of stuff. So
did you know anybody when you were growing up that was like having sex or like have had an abortion or anything like that? Or did you just learn it like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, I went to public school.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was very known.
Yeah.
But no, there was nobody around me that had ever had an abortion, even close to it. There was a lot of, there wasn't even a lot of like teen moms, but you would hear about it. And if there was teen moms, it wasn't around me. I was a teen mom. I actually had I was pregnant my senior year of high school and had my son. I graduated in May and I had my son in August.
Okay. Yeah. So can you explain? So you were a teen mom. Were you like the first teen mom that like was around like in your church or like the people?
I look at my best friend that's sitting here, but no, actually, yes, I was the first one.
A pioneer.
Yep, I just pioneered the way.
That is crazy.
So no, yeah, actually, fun fact, I was actually a pastor's daughter of a Hispanic church, and I was the first teen mom in my crew, in my friend group, in my church. So you can just imagine how that went, being a very conservative Hispanic legalistic church, and the pastor's daughter is pregnant. Yeah. Not only that, I was single. I was not with the baby's dad. Yeah. So I was going into this alone.
Wow, that is crazy. I can't imagine like for like being that young and then also carrying all of that, not just like obviously a real child, but carrying the weight of your family and like your church and just even being the first to do this and to like do that and alone as well. I can't imagine. But okay, so when you're that young, what was your experience in church, like going through that process or anything like that, or church leadership, or how did the church react?
So they did not react in a healthy way. Right. There was a Sunday that I arrived at church, already pregnant and leadership knew. And they held a church meeting and put me in front of the church where I had to tell the church what I did. And I had to explain my situation and I had to let them know. And, and I pretty much begged the church, like, hey, don't hold this against my parents. This was all me. Like, I took responsibility. I was like, please don't. Like, a little part of me was like, I hope my parents don't get fired. Like I was just, I was just holding and carrying a lot. So I was just, just went up there, took it how it was, let them know, hey, I think it was always been in me to be tougher than I was at that young age. But I was like, no, this is me. This is what I'm going to do. And I just made my mind up and I faced it. So I had to explain to the church, in front of the church, that I was pregnant and I was single.
That's tough. You're tough. Yeah. I can't, like, that's so wild. From that moment, what was your relationship with, like church? Did you still go to church after, like, as you were pregnant or like had the baby? Like, what were you?
So doing? Yes, no, I had to go to church. It was mandatory. You lived in this house, you went to church. Okay. So, I went to the church. It was kind of, one of those situations where they would take me aside and be like, tell me what a disappointment I was. Or it was one of those things where it was always like, you knew better. You're the pastor's daughter. It's almost like because my dad was in leadership, like I should know better. I should do better. You know what I mean? And it was always a spotlight. Like it was always like, if I misbehaved, it was like, oh, it's because they're with the pastor's daughter, And at the end of the day, it's like, we're just kids. We're just teenagers, you know? So I did continue going. I'm not going to just sit here and bash because there was a handful of people that did support me, that did love on me and make sure that I was eating and making sure that I was being taken care of. But there was that group of people that were just nosy and just being mean and ugly. And actually, I haven't shared the story, so it just popped up in my head. But I knew the group of people, the group of women that were being ugly and nasty. Yeah. And they would ask me who the dad was, and I would say, oh, the daddy's black, or oh, the daddy's Asian, or like I would tell different people different things. That's amazing. And it would get back to my dad, and my dad was like, can you please stop? Like that's amazing. He's like, I know exactly what you're doing. Like stop. And he thought it was funny
because it is funny.
Exactly, right? So everybody like nobody knew who he was, and so it was just fun to just kind of tell everybody different stories and see where it went, It was just fun. It was just entertaining. Like I just had to make fun of the situation, because it was very miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, like you were telling all these stories and like ultimately got back is like, who's gossiping?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you know who the gossipers are. Like don't talk to these ladies.
So, but to go back to your question is at that moment I made an inner vow and I said, I would never do this to my child. This is not where I want to be. And it made it very clear that I just didn't want anything to do with church. Yeah. And at the moment, I couldn't separate church and God. Okay. I would put it in the same, the same category. Yeah. And now that I'm older, looking back, obviously two different things. It's church and God, two separate things. So at the time, it was more legalistic, like I said, and I kept it all in one bundle. And I was just like, as soon as I turn 18, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what I did.
So when you were younger, like you were saying about the church and God thing, was it like the people at church represented God and God was defined by the people at church? Is that how you were understanding
Absolutely.
it? Okay.
So I absolutely had that mindset.
Okay.
There was no teaching of relationship with God. It was more rules and just follow these rules and you'll get to heaven and behave because God is watching. And if you don't, bad things will happen. And so it was more of those things like rule following, you know, and you had to, I actually was not allowed to wear pants. I was not allowed to wear makeup. I loved sports. I loved basketball. And I couldn't even play sports because I couldn't wear shorts. You know, everything was like evil or of the world, and we are not of the world. So it was one of those things where it was just like I had to give up. Like we couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't. There was just so many rules. Yeah. And growing up, it was like I can't raise a child like this. You know, there has to be more. And I've always had that inside me, even as a little girl, looking around at my surroundings and be like, I see the good, but I see so much bad, and this cannot be what we live for. Yeah, 100%.
And for you to also like make the decision, even at being so young, to decide I'm not this, there has to be more, and willing to like leave what you've known. So what happened in those years that you were away, or I guess also, which I guess maybe is leading into the question of like, what led you to, like, what was the story of like led you to have an abortion?
So at 18, I had my son and I moved out on my own, and it was one of those situations. I mean, it was, you know, it was hard, but it was also I was in this home where everything was no, right? Like everything was bad. And then now I'm in my own apartment. I only had a mattress and my son. Yeah, I mean, it was fun. Yeah. But then it was like I had all this freedom. So it was just like wilding out, you know. It was just one of those things where it was just like, okay, let's do this. Let's see what this world that everybody's been telling me about, what's so scary, what's so bad about it. And it was just like, let me go explore. And in that exploring, and you know, and I had a blast. You know, my early 20s was amazing. Yeah. You know, but in that time I met my now husband, Josue, shout out. We met and we started a relationship, and within those years, it was like within the first 5 years, I got pregnant 3 times, and we decided to have abortions. Neither one of us were. I just remember the first time I thought to myself, like, I just remembered everything that I went through when I announced my first pregnancy. And I remember the shame and the burden that it was on my family, the financial burden that was on me at the time, because, you know, I was by myself, you know what I mean? And yeah, they say have the baby. It's, but whenever I went to try to get like assistance, I mean, it was hard, you know, there was shame, and it was just so much, you know. And I just remembered when I was sitting there and I found myself pregnant, I'm like, one, I'm not even like in a serious relationship with this guy. You know, I'm finding myself pregnant again. I just can't do this. I cannot bring another child into this world when I can barely afford the child that I have. And, you know, and so I just made the tough decision. We made the tough decision to go ahead and have an abortion. And that's what we did. And because we had the first one, when we found ourselves in that situation again, it was just so easy just to go do it. Because at those first 5 years, it was just years of numbing. Even with my traumatic experience of being a teen mom, those were numbing years. Right. You know what I mean? Like I just like was numbing myself in all kinds of ways. And I was just surviving. I wasn't thriving. I was surviving. Absolutely. And it was just like doing what I had to do to make sure I had rent, to make sure my kid had food, and just for myself too, just to stay, you know, sane. Absolutely. Whatever that looked like, you know what I mean? Whether it's going out or whatever that looked like. So I was just constantly in a numbing, you know, season. And because I was in that numbing season, it was just easy for me to make that choice. And it continued to be a numbing season for 20 plus years.
Yeah. That is like, hearing all the circumstances and like hearing your story as like even a child, I can't imagine how much you even brought into that relationship. Like even without you knowing, like without you realizing, like absolutely you were carrying so much, even from like being so young and being aware of like your family and like the standing with the church, like all those things that, like children care. You know what I mean? But so from that moment of you making that having those abortions, I want to talk about, I couldn't remember, I saw my question. I want to talk about a little bit. So I think Christians, especially, and typically if you grew up like very conservative, there is a stigma around abortions, of course, or being pro-choice, etc. And there's obviously like this villainization of women oftentimes, and also of like the care that people get when they go get abortions, and like, you know, just the push to like destroy them all, or I don't know, whatever, stuff like that. And I really want to like talk about it, because I feel like people are always afraid of what they don't understand. Absolutely. Right. And so would you be willing to share just about the experience that you had going to the hospital? Like, I don't even know what it is either.
No, absolutely. So I went through, the first time I went through Planned Parenthood. Okay. And it was a clinic. Yeah. And even this other one was at like an actual clinic, you know, but it was, when we arrived, there was protesters. Right. Protesters in my face. Okay. Telling me I was going to hell. Yeah. Telling me, I mean, you name it. Yeah. They said it in my face, pushing me in my, then friend with benefits. Right. I didn't want to call him boyfriend, but now my husband. But you know, it was chaotic. It was scary. There's people with signs calling me all kinds of things. But when I walked into the clinic and checked in, I mean, it was just like if you were going to any kind of procedure. I mean, they were gentle, they were caring, they were, you know, they talked about the process. They don't let you see the heartbeat. They don't let you see the sonogram. They don't let you see any of that. Yeah. So they just, and it's just a procedure, just like if you're going to get any kind of other medical procedure, but they are very gentle. I know there is a lot of stigma about how they're forcing you, and they do ask you, are you here on your own will? They do ask you that question. I don't know if it's a legal thing, but I do remember all 3 times them asking, are you being forced to be here? Wow. And all 3 times I had to say no. Yeah. And they do talk to you before to make sure that you are aware of the decision you're making. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was one of those things that it was, but they do. I mean, it's just like any kind of medical procedure. Yeah. But I think I feel like what's also really unique about your story, even when you were sharing about church, was that there was like women that were talking about you behind your back. And I even wonder, like, how were those protesters outside? Like, were they women? Were they men? Or was it mixed? It was mixed. They had children out there. They had men, women. There were people out there preaching, you know, and it was one of those things where it's like, they weren't being nice about it. Yeah. They were being nasty. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think about it, and it's just like, you know, one of the times, I'll share the story. It was at a clinic. We were sitting kind of like we are right here, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like zoned, right? And my husband goes there. We can hear the protesters because they're standing on the other side of the street. I mean, on the sidewalk, like next to the sidewalk. Yeah. And they're just saying all kinds of stuff, you know. And it's men, women, children. I mean, you name it. Yeah. And they have their Bibles out there, and they have scripture, and so my husband goes out there, and he lights a cigarette, and he's smoking. He was smoking. He don't smoke no more, but he was smoking. He lit up his cigarette, and he's in there, and he's just telling them, like, just kind of throwing Bible verses back at them, like, you without sin cast the first stone. Right. You know, back to the story in the Bible, right? Yeah. Where the adulterous woman, they bring the adulterous woman to Jesus. And it was one of those things where it was like, they were just nasty. Right. I just remember the nastiness and the ugly, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that if maybe they would have approached it different, maybe I would have changed. I'm not blaming them. I'm not making excuses, you know, because I'm an adult and I have free will. But I just remember the nastiness. And I just remember thinking, this is Christianity, you know? Absolutely. So, yeah. That grieves me that was your experience. And I think also for you to like come from being outside and experiencing all of that to come to a clinic where you feel cared for, like they're making sure that you're not being coerced, and it's like all of these nuances that also are a part of this process that it feels like
it's just always so much easier to make people villains than it is to like consider them as people and to consider all the circumstances that would lead someone to that place. And yeah, I just think that is so sad.
It is very sad.
It's very sad. I think I was thinking about this the other day because of election season and everything going on, that I think it's very interesting how people like we try to legislate conviction, right? Like these things that people should value, like life, like mercy, like kindness, those things that we think are good and like godly. We try to like make those law, and ultimately like we just end up back at the Old Testament where we already tried to do that, and it obviously ended up in more death and ended up in like more pain. And I think a lot of times like that's what ends up happening with this conversation is churches and people will try to like legislate something that's meant to come from conviction, you know, and meant to come from like a revelation from God, and meant to come from all these things, but making it a law doesn't change anything. And to your point, like if they would have come at it differently, would it have changed your opinion? Would it have changed your decision? Probably. Yeah. Like we don't know. But like even I don't know. I just think that is a very like difficult kind of thing to, I guess, like wrestle with.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that, kind of want to back it up a little bit. Whenever I did become pregnant with my son Ethan, I went to the pregnancy center. And they scared the shit out of me of having an abortion.
Oh,
like
okay.
It was like they were so forceful. They were like pushy. They were, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that they weren't. They're an awesome organization, and they were there for me afterwards when I needed like, you know, maternity clothes and you know to support me through my journey of pregnancy, right? But I remember thinking like, I don't know if that's the way to do it,
right?
Because to me now, looking back, I serve a God of choice, not a God of force. Yeah. And I think the way you approach situations, like you said, it should be conviction, right? It should be a revelation from God and the Holy Spirit guiding you. That makes that, because when you have a conviction from God, it's a conviction from God, and you do a complete change of life, right? So when you try to force that on somebody, that's not, God doesn't force himself on us.
Yeah.
He gave us a gift of free will.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people get it wrong, especially, you know, the hardcore evangelical Christians or whatever category you want to put them in. You know, they're trying to ban abortion. They're trying to force these decisions on women and taking basic human rights away from women, right? Especially here, I mean, we're in Texas, right? Yeah. So this is something that we're facing, where instead they should be tackling the reasons why women are seeking these solutions. Right. Or we should be educating people on sex education, birth control, poverty issues, you know what I mean? So those are the things that cause women to choose abortion. And I think those are the issues we should start tackling. Yeah. Like, what is the root cause? Banning abortion in Texas abortion's not going to go down, because guess what happens? The mortality of women and infants went up. Right. You know what I mean? And people are just going out of the state to have abortions. So like, why don't we get together and find the root and start from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a firm believer that knowledge is power. Absolutely. Like the more that people understand, the more that people are willing to be curious and to ask questions and to learn, the more I think compassion that you'll have for people. I think the less you'll be a victim of fear mongering, which is like everywhere, even at your pregnancy center, them scaring you into having a child, and like stuff like that. I just think all of those, I think knowledge and information is so important. And I think like empowering people that way will help them make like better choices. Obviously as well, like I love that you said that like God isn't afraid of our free will. Absolutely. And he's the one that gave it to us.
Yeah, it's a gift from God.
If God was afraid of that, we would just be robots. Yeah. Like we would, you know what I mean? But he's not afraid of that. I think we're afraid of that for some reason. And so, yeah, but I also want to ask you, so all of these like years have gone by. You mentioned you're now married to Josue. You walked through that journey together. I want to know, I mean, now you have what 4 kids? 4 kids, 3 dogs,
4 dogs,
4 dogs,
4 kids, 4 dogs,
4 kids, 4 dogs,
1 husband.
Yeah, and so much life like in those years. Obviously, with your 4 kids as well. I would love to hear about. You also work at a church now, which I think is amazing. Obviously considering like your entire story and your relationship with church, like all of that. So, I'd love to hear, like, obviously God did something in the middle of all of those years. And I'd love to hear just like your healing journey with the abortion, of course, and then like with your family and church. I just think all that is amazing.
Absolutely. So, we obviously got married, we stayed together and we made it, because that in itself, you don't really hear about people staying together after something like that, an experience like that. So we have been together 22 years, married 16 years. We have 4 kids, 4 dogs, as you mentioned. And when we got married, we were not healthy. We were not healthy. We got married. We went into the the marriage with a lot of baggage. Personal baggage and baggage that we created ourselves. We had a lot to unpack. So where my healing journey started is when we did rededicate ourselves to God, and we started that inner healing, and we started with our inner healing individually, and then we started on our marriage. We had a lot of rough patches in our marriage, and we started with our marriage, and neither one of us ever talked about the abortions.
Wow.
To each other, to anybody. It was just something like, it happened. We're not going to talk about it. And just move forward. But both of us were carrying that shame. And especially after having 1 kid and then another, and, just starting a family, like, it obviously is in the back of our head. Obviously, every time we see a baby, every time there's a big moment, every time there's something, it's always there. It's like lingering. And so we just never talked about it. And I think I carried it more than he did. He says that he forgives easier than I do. I hold on to stuff. I'm still mad about stuff that happened in kindergarten. Like,
fair enough.
I just hang on. Like, I am just one of those loyal, like, I just hang on to stuff. And so I don't forgive as easily as he does. So I just held on to it longer. So it just started with inner healing, or working on our marriage. And once I felt safe enough in my marriage to start unpacking what I have been harboring inside, which, because I wasn't dealing with this, it was resurfacing in other ways. So you name it, it resurfaced, and it was not healthy, and it was not pretty. And so when I became safe enough in my marriage to where I can be like, this is what I'm dealing with, is whenever my healing journey started. And I'm still going through it, and that brings me to this year. I just felt like whenever actually not this year, whenever there was the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it was one of those things where it just started resurfacing. I was at the church and they were celebrating, and it just didn't sit well with me, the way they were celebrating so many people. And I'm not blaming the church. Now looking back, it was more of a me issue than them issue, right? And because I had so much church hurt, anytime there's any kind of issues like that going, it's going to resurface, and it's going to open that wound or kind of like poke at it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so,
for the record, I didn't celebrate. I was mad as well.
There was a lot of people.
I sat there like this
because I understand that there's a root cause of it. You know what I mean? And I understand by banning it, you're not doing anything.
Absolutely.
But making it worse.
All I could think about was women who were there who never told anybody they had an abortion.
Absolutely.
Who men that were there that also were like a part of that decision as well, that never told. And like, what are we doing? You're at church. Forget it. Anyway, continue.
But it was one of those things where it was like, and now that I'm having these conversations, I'm finding so many people saying the same thing. They were like, no, we were not happy that the church was celebrating like this. But at the time, that's what they thought that they needed to do. And now that we're having these conversations, and that I'm sharing, and I'm educating the church, I'm so proud of our I'm going to say my campus, right? Because I can't speak for the whole church in general, but my church family, our church family has been so supportive. And even now, just them knowing my journey, it's like they're more aware and more sensitive, and they're leaning in and asking questions and like, how can we be better? How can we help? You know what I mean? So I'm very proud of them. But going back to, I think we're on one question now.
Yeah.
But my healing journey, it started when I started unpacking that with my husband. And when I felt safe enough to talk to him about how I was feeling is whenever all of that Roe v. Wade started happening.
Oh, okay.
Because it's resurfaced. Yeah. And I'm like, hey, at that point, I had already learned through all of this inner healing and, you know, let's just say, you know, therapy or however you want to, you know, like I had already learned, like, I need to voice what I'm feeling. I feel something, I need to voice it, and I need to process. Yeah. And at that point, because I wasn't always like that, like I would just harbor, and then I would just explode. Yeah. And I was like, I was not nice. So now at this point, it was more like, okay, this is what I'm feeling when they did this, or what, now that this is happening. So I started talking to my pastor. And which happens to be your mama. Yep. And so I started processing with her and started unpacking and started just like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I don't know what it is. And just talking about it. It's almost like, you know, like a counseling session. Yeah. And just unpacking it and just being like, hey, I don't know what to do. Like, I feel like God is asking me to do something. I don't know what to do. And just having somebody in leadership, somebody pastoring me, somebody like leading me in life, you know what I mean, that I trust and love and respect. And she was just kind of like, no. And we would talk every week until finally I'm like, I feel like God's asking me to do something. And so part of my healing journey started with all of this inner healing, then starting with working on my marriage, you know, having better communication and just learning, you know, how to do marriage, because you have to learn that marriage is hard. You know,
that's what I hear.
Yes, marriage is. But actually, you know what? I take that back, because Josue would be really upset with me for saying that. Marriage is work. Yeah. So this is an advice that I heard, and it's my favorite advice I've ever heard. Marriage is work, but work is also fun, fulfilling. You know what I mean?
For sure.
But it's hard, right?
Absolutely.
So marriage.
Some days are hard at work.
Yeah,
some hard work days.
Absolutely. But sometimes it's fun at work.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And sometimes I don't want to go to work.
True.
And that's the same thing with marriage. Yeah. Sometimes you just don't want to, you know, whatever. Yeah. So we won't go down.
That's awesome.
This isn't a marriage, you know, but that's
next
real
one.
talk.
Next one.
But that's real talk. You know what I mean?
100%.
So we love each other, but sometimes we don't like each other.
Valid.
It just happens. So whenever I was going through that, then I was like, okay, God, I need you to show me what you need me to do. But all of these years, I've been working on myself. I've been working on my relationships, communication. I mean, you name it, right? And my walk with God, just getting closer. And it is really true. God is really close to the brokenhearted, you know? Yeah. And so through this time, I've always felt him near, and God kind of gently guided me, because I'm hard-headed. So he's always been gently guiding me, like, take one step, just one step at a time, you know? And that's what I've been doing, and one step at a time. And so I have not, up till this year, I still carried the shame and the unforgiveness. Like, I knew God forgave me. God's awesome. Yeah. He forgives us. He's my Heavenly Father. But I could never forgive myself. And because I couldn't forgive myself, I couldn't move on to what God had next for me. So I asked God to show me and to tell me what I needed to do. So my biggest, my Manasseh moment. Yeah. Yeah. We were both in the same meeting. Manasseh, look it up. Yeah. Manasseh moment was when I went to this retreat. And in this retreat, I was able to spend one-on-one time with God. And I had a lot of, it was kind of cheesy, but it was kind of very, I was very standoffish. I was like, I don't want to do this. These people don't look like me. You know, but everybody there had all the counselors and everybody there had an abortion. Okay. So they were there. Yeah. Because it's beautiful. It's kind of hard to counsel somebody when you've never been through it.
Absolutely.
Right. So I went to this retreat and I asked God to show me, and I found this retreat, and it was a very intensive retreat. Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And in that retreat, I learned how to forgive myself. And I had a Manasseh moment. Yeah. And I let it go. And I let God be. And he just showed me a lot. Yeah. And in that retreat, I was able to acknowledge life. We did exercises that where I had to name my babies. Because at the end of the day, They were babies. They were lives that I took. I made the choice to take their lives, and I named them. I celebrated their life, and we had a memorial service, and it was just a beautiful thing. It was probably, I thought burying my dad was the hardest thing, but this was the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah.
So, and in that retreat, like I was saying, it's I had to name them. They gave us dolls for each baby, and I had to sleep with them overnight. And I thought it was the cheesiest thing you've ever had to do. But at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I'm like, these dolls represent my babies. And I held them so tight because the night before I had named them, which I had never done before. I lit a candle and I named each one, you know. Right. And I named them. I had a naming ceremony, and then they gave me these dolls. And I took these dolls back to my room. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I held them and I cried and cried. And I thanked God for their life. And I asked for forgiveness. And the next day, I had a memorial service for them. Not me, the retreat. Yeah. And we had a memorial service for them. And I had to read a letter to them. And I apologized to them for not being strong enough to face whatever the world was going to throw my way. And I apologized. And I was like, going back to, I just apologized. Yeah. I'm like, what else? I didn't know what else to do. And I was talking straight to my babies. It was just me and my babies and God. And I would just held them, and I just held them so tight. And I just was like, this isn't fair. I just felt like I just got them back. And now I have to give them back. And it was a full service. We had a preacher and everything. We sang hymns. And it was a full memorial service. And I remember that moment. It's just like, at that moment, I felt like I knew God had forgiven me, but I forgave myself. And I felt like my babies forgave me at that moment. Yeah. And at that moment, when I read that letter to them, and I apologized to them, and I apologized to them, I just felt it. I felt that Manasseh moment, and I forgave myself, and I allowed myself to start grieving. And because of that, I was able to call it what it is, name it, and now I can move forward and start this grieving journey that I'm on. And for so many years, they don't talk about the emotional, mentally, physically effects that abortions have on you. And some women, hey, they're okay. You know what I mean? But there's so many people that carry this shame and this unforgiveness for so many years that they never talk about it. Yeah. At that retreat, there was a woman there for 81 years old that she was carrying that shame. And I'm like, I can't do this. I cannot carry this shame any longer. Yeah. And I forgave myself at that moment. But I forgave myself at that moment because I felt like my babies forgave me at that moment. Yeah. And because of that, we're working hard on creating safe space for women in a church setting to come and start their healing journey. Yeah. In a church setting, which you don't really hear much of.
No, not at all. And thank you so much. I love your story. She sent it to me beforehand, and so I was reading it. I was sobbing yesterday reading it when I called you I was like drying my tears. I was like, this is so beautiful. I love that you were able to have that moment of like, and I just think it's like the kindness of God to always be like faithful to his word. Like the Bible is so the truth, Absolutely. Like when, God's word says like, confess your sins to one another that you may be free. Like that was literally that, like someone else who's experienced exactly what you're going through, hearing your story and then creating that space for you to find that freedom and that like ability to like continue perpetuating that for other people is amazing. Like that is the gospel,
Absolutely. The hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like, I think that's something as well, a part of like everyone's story. Like all of your choices have consequences, good and bad. Yeah. And that's something that like a part of our life, it's always like we always have to be willing to die, you know? And I mean, like, healing is also you like dying to yourself, you know? Sometimes that's what that looks like. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I love that story. But you are so passionate about moving forward and helping other women move forward in this journey. I would love for you to just share like your vision for like what you hope for the church and like the capital C church moving forward, of like how you would want to see the church care for people, care for women, care for families who have also gone through a similar situation.
Absolutely. So as I was mentioning, when we're working on creating a safe space where you always say come as you are, right? But it's almost one of those things like come as you are if you fit into these categories, right? Yeah. That this category is accepted, this category is accepted, this category is not accepted. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, we should be accepting everybody, right? You know, and so it's not common to talk about these kind of about abortions. I mean, let's name it. Yeah, let's name it. Abortions. Yeah. It's not common to talk about that. And so we want to create a safe space in the church, in God's house, to be able to have these conversations and for women to come and start that healing journey, to start forgiving themselves, to whatever stage they are in their grief and in their journey. Let's make space for them and help them get to where they need to get.
Yeah, that's so good. I know we kind of already touched on it, but I also do love your perspective. There's a pastor, I think Andy Stanley, at his church, he says that we draw circles, not lines. And I think a lot of churches draw lines in the sand, or lines where they're like to your point, like, just no, like if this is what you're bringing in, no. And I love that like image of drawing a circle around people, of like, no, come in, like whatever you have to bring, like this is a safe place. So I'm so excited to see obviously what God does through that ministry and like through all the lives of these women and families. But yeah, do you have any, I guess, like resources for people that they can check out if you know of any, or like, anything that helped you navigate that process, like books maybe, or like blogs? I don't know. So
at the moment, we are researching the right curriculum for our church. Okay. So for me, what I'm trying to create, what we're trying to create is what I needed at that time when we were going through it. And there's not really a lot out there. There is stuff out there. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I've learned there's all kinds of stuff out there, but sometimes it's not right for the demographic or who you're working with. Right. So, I would start with inner healing. Okay. Which is you can find at any church. Therapy. Yep. I'm a fan of therapy. Shout out therapy. Shout out therapy. And find a mentor or somebody that you can go and just be completely honest. The amount of times that I sat in that office with my pastor lady friend, and at this point, she's my pastor, but she's also a very dear friend of mine. And where I sat there and just could be real. Like, you have to find somebody that you could be real with. But I would say that start with inner healing, your relationship with God, and just start there. Yeah. When you start there and you really do seek a relationship with God, He will guide you with the next step and the next step, and just find something close to you because there is things out there, but there's just not a lot of safe places in churches. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to create in our area, because in our area, we don't have it.
Yeah, we don't. So yeah, that's awesome. You're awesome.
Oh, you're awesome.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having
and sharing
me.
Your story. I respect you and admire you, and for so many things, but like watching you navigate this like new era of sharing your story and your life is just so inspiring, and I admire your bravery so much in your whole journey, not just today. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I love Monica. If you love Monica, you have to like this video. That's a rule. But thank you. Don't forget to subscribe and follow the podcast wherever you're listening. Comment, leave us 5 stars. Shout out Monica. We'll leave some resources in the description as well if you know anyone who is needing them or facing this. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Love you. Bye. Bye. you.